Okay, it says recording in progress, so I think that means we're recording. I am here today with Nelson Wells from Team Clermont. Team Clermont is an organization that has helped us in Blueburst promote our Blueburst album through press and radio. And we've been chatting lately about the music industry and radio and Spotify and all that stuff. And I thought it'd be cool to have Nelson on to chat more about it. So hello, Nelson Wells from Team Clermont.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me. I
How much
appreciate
done
it.
so far? Is that pretty good?
It's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
future as an interviewer. Um, well, first off, just tell me a little bit about Team Claremont and what you do and the history of the place and all that. You're coming
Yeah,
from
sure.
Georgia, I know that.
We are in Athens, Georgia, not too far from you. And we've always been here. We've had a couple of temporary remote offices with different reps in Los Angeles and New York and places, but we've always called Athens home. Started it with my business partner, Bill Benson, who you know, who does
Mhm.
press for us. And I mostly head up the radio department and deal with some of the Spotify playlisting campaigns with one of our reps in Los Angeles. And
Mhm.
then my radio guy is actually in Prague. He started with us as an intern ages ago in Athens, and he's there now. So we have people kind of spread out. But in a nutshell, we are simply a music PR firm.
Gotcha.
What I think what makes us different is one, we have a radio promotion department. So it used to be 100% of our business, and now it's not even 50%. But we love radio, and I've dealt with radio for so long. I just can't give it up no matter what I do. And it gets frustrating at times as things change, but every part of it changes, as you know. And so we've offered press since 2001 and radio just a few years before that when we launched. And that's it as far as what we do. But we also offer digital distribution through the Orchard and Sony.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's you mentioned things change. It's just been unimaginable change for music and for I'm sure what you do in the last 10 to definitely 20 years. I was just thinking this morning, I didn't even 20 years ago, I didn't even have an iPhone. I had one of those. I was so excited to get one of those phones with little tiny keys on it, you typed with your thumb.
Right. A QWERTY keyboard,
Yeah.
literally on a phone.
Yeah.
Well, I
Um,
never went the Raspberry route, but I
yeah.
did get the iPhone as soon as it came out. What was
I
that?
had a
Right.
Pilot. I had a Palm Pilot, which I mostly used to play Sim City on. That's pretty much. But uh, you know, radio. Well, let's talk radio, I guess. It occurred to me today. It's like it's changed so much in that uh, when I was growing up, it's like DJs were powerful celebrities, in the world. Now you think of a DJ, you think of a guy at a party spinning records, but a DJ,
Right.
a guy at a radio station, who picked
Yeah.
music.
I mean,
Uh,
the DJs introduced me to every piece of music back in the day as a kid that stuck with me and changed, who I was.
yeah,
So I would sit at home with my cassette recorder and I would record songs on the radio and just get, how you used to have to push play and record at the same time on an old Panasonic,
yeah,
and just hear those first two notes of a song and know, oh, that's one I want, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
at the end, if you were lucky, you got the DJ to talk about it. But
Right. And I remember spending, loads of time waiting when they'd be like, all right, and coming up soon, the new song from Van Halen or whatever. And so you'd sit there waiting for, are they going to play that?
right.
Get on tape. But nowadays it feels like that Well, the DJs did curation back then. They were people who knew a lot about music and went out and found bands they liked and helped to break them. And now it seems like that's, it's the algorithm doing that, with Spotify.
Well, yeah, with Spotify, it is. And, not to leave radio totally behind, um, but there are still DJs on weekend shows and things like that who can choose what they're going to play and do it in their way. And we still work with those folks.
Yeah.
Um, and radio is not operating on an algorithm, but commercial radio is, for the most part, run by consultants, and radio stations pay consultants big money to tell them what to play. And so, their songs are tested in rooms full of people in Los Angeles and Minneapolis and Chicago, and that's how, these consultants tell radio what to play, and their stations are owned by so few large radio corporations that it all sounds the same now. It's homogenized. So,
Yeah.
we really focus on the non-commercial radio panel, public radio, NPR affiliates, and college radio, because they are still free form for the most part,
Yeah.
and we can get independent artist airplay there.
Yeah. It's kind of the last vestige of that old model, right?
It really is. And that's one reason I think still have such a love for it. Other than just college radio, to me, is so entertaining, and listening to those DJs. I mean, they're 19, 20 years old and volunteering and just doing, what excites them. And so, that can come off really fun on air.
Yeah. It was funny. My wife was asking me where the name alternative come from in the first place. Why is it called alternative music? And I said, well, it's because in the 80s, that's what it was. It was, you had mainstream radio that, like you said, were run by corporations who had consultants. And then you had the alternative, which was college radio and local, not for
Yeah.
stations that would play different stuff and would go out and find different stuff that was a legitimate alternative. Now I don't really know what it's an alternative to. It sounds, it all sounds a bit, I don't know what that genre means anymore.
Right. Well, it's still used quite a bit, which is kind of strange. But at some point, probably 10 years ago, we started calling alternative rock stations new rock stations, because they weren't necessarily the alternative. That a lot of the alt rock had become very mainstream.
Yeah.
And still is today. But we called those new rock stations. And uh, a lot of the industry still calls it alternative. But as you said, it was the alternative to the mainstream, which would typically have been, top 40 is AC, adult contemporary. And I'm sure when we were 13 years old, Craig, you and I weren't thinking that we were listening to anything adult or contemporary.
Yeah.
We just thought, this is the new rock and the new bands. And now, whatever that is an alternative to adult contemporary, I suppose, in top 40.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, we deal mostly with the college radio stations and the public stations, who are a little more, they're a little more experimental, and they're not being told what to play.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm kind of curious to see what's going to become of 99X coming back here.
Is it?
Yeah, it's back. It's on the air.
Wow.
And Steve Craig's on there and everything.
No way.
Yeah, but I don't really know who's behind it, like if it's a big corporate thing or not. I mean, they have a show on the weeknights called Planet Jill, that a DJ, an actual DJ named Jill,
Right.
her last name escapes me at the moment, does. And from the looks of the playlist on there, it looks like she's curating it,
Okay, good.
more offbeat stuff. But you turn it on during the day and you hear kind of what you used to hear on 99X, the 90s rock. but yeah, I'm not quite sure what it is yet, or whether anyone's listening. I hope so. I hope people are listening to it. But
Well, you can tune into it and let
yeah,
us all know, right?
and 96 Rock came back, but only as an online station, and it doesn't have DJs on 96 Rock. It's just music, and then they have the old announcer, the guy who did 96 Rock, pure rock and roll. He comes on and says
Right.
some or other. But
Well, I just
it'll
pulled
be
up.
interesting to me if those take off, because there is something, I think, missing in people's lives from that. I wrote down on this notes today, obligatory Rush quote, begin the day with a friendly voice, a companion unobtrusive. And it's like, I think you miss that when you're listening to a playlist. You miss having a person there and feel like you're hanging out with somebody in a way.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and they're gonna educate you about something. It might be something you never knew about the band Led Zeppelin, or it might be about the weather, but at least there's a person there who comforts you in some way and says, yeah, we're in this together, whatever the day may hold, right?
Yeah.
And I still really like that. I mean, I'm the guy who drives a 23-year-old car and listens to the radio almost exclusively in the car.
Yeah.
I don't at home or in the office that often, but in the office, if I'm listening to radio, it's because I'm tuning into stations who I'm talking to all
Mhm.
over the country.
Yeah.
And so I could be listening to a station in, Portland, Oregon for a half hour, and next thing you know, I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. And so I get a little bit of all of the different, styles from region to region.
Yeah. It occurs to me that having a person to listen to, it's not unlike podcasts, or a lot of podcasts these days, like, the Mark Maron one, and I listen to the David Spade, Dana Carvey one a lot, where it's like, you do feel like you're sitting in a room having a conversation with people, or at least eavesdropping on their conversation.
Right.
There
Yeah,
was a,
there's something comforting about that. That's kind
yeah,
of what I felt from radio.
yeah,
It may not be a conversation, but there's somebody there, uh, just talking to you and playing some music. And
I remember there was a show called the King Biscuit Flour Hour back in
oh
the,
yeah, I
and
remember.
from what I remember about it, the format was sort of like, you'd have an interview with the musician, kind of talking about, I think it was all different things, but one I remember was like the musician talking a little bit about what they were doing, and then song, and they play the whole song,
Yeah,
and then back to the musician talking about whatever the next song was. And that was kind of a cool mashup of, I guess what you today you call a podcast, and just regular radio where you're playing a full song. I don't know what my point is. I wish they'd bring that back, though. I think it's a good.
right. No, I think you're right though. Like you're the one who touched on podcasts, and
Mhm.
they really have filled that void, and that should tell us something, and it should tell the industry something that people want the curation, but they also want the human contact and that
Yeah,
conversation. With a podcast, it feels like you can be a part of it to a
yeah,
degree, just
yeah,
like I was saying, the DJ at the old, 96 Rock would just tell you about, you know, John Bonham and things like that and the weather. And so you just felt like a part of it. Like, yeah, he's just right down the road.
yeah,
He would have he or she, the DJ would have talked about this storm that just came through, like,
yeah,
hey, this thing's heading our way, and like get prepared and have a preparedness plan. And
yeah.
so, there is that human element that we don't have with Spotify playlists and things like that.
What? Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I appreciate not having the commercials, with commercial radio, but I do appreciate having that, other human on the other end.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people still do have commercials because they don't pay the subscription fee to Spotify.
Mm,
Um,
right.
but it's different though. It's like you could say, well, the commercials were paying for the music back then, they're paying for the music now, but back then it was paying for a curated show. Now the commercials are paying for you to have access to every song ever recorded, basically.
Right.
Um, but what's interesting to me is Spotify coming up with this automated DJ thing. Have you seen or heard that stuff yet? With the
Yeah, I haven't listened to it. I just
Yeah,
read that was happening.
it's kind of cool, but it's kind of creepy at the same time. It's like this guy comes in and goes, "Hey, Craig, I'm so and so. I'm your personal DJ. We're gonna ride. I'm gonna hit you up with some pavement." And it's just AI. It's all AI.
Yeah.
Still, it's kind of, oh, cool. I got there's a guy there, but there's not. But
No. And I really don't want him saying my name. Like
yeah,
that would really catch me off guard too,
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. And
is
he's like,
he'll
here's something you were listening to last week. He'll do that
yeah.
too.
Remember at 9:42 last week, you listened to the song twice? Well, we're gonna play it twice.
Yeah, yeah.
Not what I want.
With it's funny, being in a band in the '90s, I used to bitch and moan that all the power was in the hands of these few people, these DJs. Uh, and now I bitch and moan that it's all in the power of the algorithm.
Yeah.
But I think what terrifies me is that, like, would Bohemian Rhapsody make it through the algorithm? I don't think so. It has
Right.
none of the qualities of a hit song. And it's from what I understand about Spotify, and we'll get to that in a minute about how mysterious it all is. But from what I understand is they do go through your waveform and analyze it for tempo and danceability and positivity and all that kind of stuff through an automated process. But then again, Bohemian Rhapsody almost died on the vine because some record company guy didn't think it was going to be a hit. So,
Right.
you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're going to try and do something really, really different like that.
Well, yeah, and I think, I mean, you touch on a perfect point is that humans are definitely not perfect in any way. And you think of all the stories you've heard from, I mean, Queen is a great example. Led Zeppelin's another great example where, they're execs in an office in LA and a major record company were telling them, oh no, this isn't a hit. We're not going to put this out as a single.
Yeah,
And, bands like Zeppelin or Queen having enough um, clout to be able to say, no, this is our single. We are putting this out. And, you know, those bands, I mean, when bands are new now, they don't have that clout with labels,
no,
and
no,
they haven't in a long time.
yeah,
So, they have to build massive careers to even be able to have a vote. I mean, look at Taylor Swift. I mean, she was selling millions of records even in the country realm before she was massive pop, and she tried her damnedest to say, this is how I want my career to go, and had to fight. It's taken her a decade or longer to
yeah,
get through and break through certain things, and is the biggest, performer in the world. But still, she has to deal with Ticketmaster and that whole mess and
yeah.
other,
And
other monopolies.
she tried to fight Spotify and pull her music off it for a while, and then just couldn't do it. You can't do it.
She's fought everyone. She fought the label that wouldn't give her control of her music or wouldn't give her the rights, and she brilliantly decided, I'm going to record the same songs and
Yeah,
call them Taylor's version. I mean, and
yeah,
she's teaching other artists that there are ways to stay independent or stay strong or have some level of control.
yeah,
Um, and so I have a lot of respect for her for doing that, because it provides a service to other artists who are much smaller.
yeah.
And
I mean, when
yeah,
you get to a certain level, like Prince was kind of the first guy I remember to do this. You can just, I
absolutely.
want a record label. I'm just going to put it out myself. The Cure does that now. They don't have a record label, but they're the Cure.
Yeah, right. And Radiohead came along and
Yeah,
did the same thing. But you're right. Prince is a unique story and individual, and obviously quite a talent. And he was one of the first ones to just put his foot down and say, I'm changing everything. I'm taking control of all of it. I mean, he built the studio in his home and,
Yeah.
controlled it from minute one. And all of his musicians would say he controlled everything. He wanted every note just so, etc. Here's a fun fact you'll appreciate. Go back and listen to Prince's When Doves Cry.
Mhm.
He recorded that song with a bass line. And if you listen to it now, you'll hear that he took that bass line out. And the label said, we can't release this as a single. You sent us a demo that had a bass line. He said, yeah, bass line doesn't work. It's just clapping, keyboards, guitar, voice.
Yeah.
And it works brilliantly,
Yeah.
right?
That made it jump out of the radio.
Yeah.
This, that's interesting and cool.
And
Uh,
it's really just like a guitar solo, just sort of scattered across claps and
yeah.
beats and his voice. So very unique. And he took control and just said, no, this is how it's going to be. And I mean, I don't, other than the biggest stars in the world, I don't see who has that, um, level of control. The labels are still figuring out ways to control everything, just like Spotify has, et cetera. The bigger
Yeah.
these corporations get,
It's
the more
it's
they
interesting.
can.
Like it feels like Radiohead had it after the first record, like it feels like they did,
Yeah,
but I can't imagine who would have given it to them. It's like somebody must have just gone, these guys are good, and so we're gonna let them do what they want, and they do the bends, and
yeah.
obviously that did great.
I think
And I don't
back
know.
then,
Go ahead.
Capitol Records back then actually was more of an artist label for,
Yeah,
for being a major. I remember going to their offices in Los Angeles and the college radio department. I mean, it looked just like our college radio department. We had three, 20 somethings in a big room on the phone with music going. And I got to their floor where they had the radio department, and back in the corner was the college radio promotion department, and it was behind a chain link fence in their office, and they called it the cage. And
yeah,
they would just lock the door on the cage and throw them pizza and cokes, and say, get these songs to the top of college charts, and Radiohead was one of them.
yeah, yeah,
uh, I think, once they sold, a few million of that first record. What was that, Pablo Honey?
yeah,
Um, then you do have a little more clout. And then when you come up with something that's uh, you know, out there, the label sometimes doesn't know what to do with it. And so they go, well, we got to try and make it work. Let's put out fake plastic trees and see what happens,
yeah,
But video was a big driver of sales and popularity then too. You could
yeah.
turn on TV and just see what the new video was for the new song.
It's funny when OK Computer came out. I went and talked to a sound guy who was doing sound for us, my old band, and I said, "Man, have you heard Paranoid Android? It's crazy. It's got like four parts to it. It's like,
Yeah.
awesome. Like, is anybody going to buy it? Are they going to play on the radio?" And he said that video is going to save them.
Yeah.
That's what he said to me. And the video is amazing. It's just like a friend of mine said he just wept the first time he saw it with I don't know if you remember it even, but the cartoon character who just kind of goes through the world of insanity.
Yeah.
Um,
You're
but
right.
back to Prince for a second. A funny story I heard about him. He's got this famous guitar solo now from the George Harrison tribute concert where he comes out on stage and solos over "While My Guitar Gently Weeps." And you see Tom Petty and Dhani Harrison and a couple other people on stage just like going, "Holy shit, look at this guy. It's
Right.
insane." And the
Right.
story behind it is supposedly he was pissed off that they didn't put him on Rolling Stone's 100 greatest guitar players. And Jan Winter was there or whatever, and he's like, "Fuck that. I'm going to show him he's one of the 100 greatest
Yeah.
guitar players."
You'll see.
Just,
Yeah.
just absolutely tore it up.
he
Then at
did.
the end of it, he throws his Telecaster up in the air and it never came down, and no one knows what the stage knows. I would love to know how that happened, but
Yeah, we're gonna have to find the behind the scenes of that one because I
yeah,
remember that one very well too, and I did not know that story,
yeah,
but just remembered him destroying it. And
yeah,
not to tangent on Prince too much, but I just noticed on Airbnb not too long ago that there is a Wendy and Lisa from the Revolution
yeah.
have bought his childhood home and are renting it on Airbnb
Oh my God.
only for certain times of the year or whatever, but it's supposed to be the whole experience with purple rain and everything's purple and there's artifacts and things like
Yeah,
that. But
that's crazy. It's kind
guy
of,
made quite an impact, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, before we change topics, like, you talk about Prince, and one of the things I think that's gotten lost in the music world today is sort of the auteur. And that is like having the one guy who's in charge of everything, be it whether it's Prince or Brian Wilson or Bruce Springsteen, those guys, like you said, every note. And it feels like common wisdom these days is that everything needs to be done by a committee. And, you know, sometimes that works. It worked for REM, but I think they're
They're the outlier.
the unicorn in that sense, and having four guys who got along, and even they by the end of it, I think were couldn't agree on anything. So
Yeah,
there's something to be said for just having a singular vision about things.
right. Well, and a good example of that was, we just got to see the behind the scenes of Paul McCartney and the Beatles and how everything came together for them in
Yeah,
that amazing documentary that I see why Paul McCartney didn't want it to come out for a long time because he was driven and talented, but borderline bullying, and so, but somebody had to get all that talent organized and together and I mean and look at who they became, right? So
I think they
yeah,
had an interesting model in that, like, because they all wrote songs. So if it was George's song, George got final word, and if it was Paul's song, he got the final word. So you sort of all did have auteurs within a group in a way.
right.
Um, but yeah, anyway, it's something I gripe about in my day job as well. It's just like not everything can be solved by getting everybody together in a room. It's like,
Right. Let's have more meetings.
yeah, exactly. Um, but back to Spotify, the algorithm. I've talked a bit about that lately.
Right.
No one quite knows what it is. No one quite knows how to trigger it. But I don't know. Tell me your thoughts.
Changed. Yeah, and the algorithm has changed. Spotify's changed it over the years. So um they like to think that they're developing it, and they are. Um, but we don't know how that affects the artists or royalties and things like that as they change it. Um, we've talked about the algorithm as to how do we affect it, right? Because if it's that important, if it drives plays and streams, how do we get in there and get young artists played on Spotify?
There's
And
a cottage industry to fit to it.
yeah, and to be quite frank, I might do Spotify playlist campaigns, but I don't have the exact answer. Every time we go out, we are pushing humans to put it in their playlists
Yeah,
and trying to get that algorithm to pick it up because of those extra plays that are coming, right?
yeah,
And we've spent years researching how it operated, how the companies that promoted to it operated, and we found so many scams and so many, I call them Russian bot farms, but
Yeah.
they're bot farms all over the place. I mean, they're not just Russian. Um, and which ones actually benefit and which ones, are really harmful. Um, and you go and read articles now about how the top 75 songs coming out of Sweden or Norway are written by made up artists. They're a producer in his studio. Like you could do this if you wanted to, Craig. Just alter egos and crank out a bunch of jingles and get them up there, and
Yeah.
the
And
algorithm
then,
picks them up.
yeah. And then if you have some inner knowledge of how to trigger that thing,
Yeah,
and clearly, I don't want to name the service, but we used a service recently that successfully did that and got us a ton of streams, which I was hoping to kind of spread the word about the music that way. But then we got called out by Spotify because they don't want the botted streams on there. I didn't know it was botted streams when I did it naively, but Spotify's cagey about it. Like they say we don't want this. Don't send your music to these companies, but they won't tell you like who the companies are. They won't,
right.
because I think they probably have no legal recourse against it.
Yeah, and they want control. Obviously,
Yeah.
they want it to be perceived as this perfectly organic, curated entity that you
Yeah.
get to be a part of. And it's so easy for any musician to be a part of this great organic entity and have your music spread worldwide. But you and I know from experience that there are these bot farms and these companies that are people who are just taking the money, and they know how to have those numbers skyrocket. And distributors are being forced to take songs down. And you may have dealt with this too.
Yeah.
Um, so, how did they reach out to you? How did you find out? Was it your
Well,
distributor?
the Spotify contacted the distributor about
Right,
two songs that I put up, and the distributor then contacted me and said we're gonna have to take these down. And lucky for me, I was in the midst of changing distributors at the moment anyway.
right.
So the timing worked out in my favor. But no one wants that. You don't want your music taken down because you tried to promote it.
Right.
And
And
um,
and
I
how do you get
thought
it?
I did my homework. I mean, I knew there were some scam companies out there like this, but this one had great reviews on Trustpilot. So it's hard to figure out. You know, Spotify also is mysterious about, well, like you said, you have your outside playlisters, right? Just people who do playlists and they get a lot of people interested in listening. But then Spotify has people that work for them, editors who do the editorial playlists. But
Right.
they're very cagey about like who those people are. They don't want you to know who they are for the most part.
No, and they never have.
Yeah.
In fact, when they launched, we thought, okay, good. We've got that they have editors. We can reach out. They'll have office hours just like everyone else we're used to contacting to promote to.
Yeah.
And it was the opposite. We're not allowing contact from publicists and record labels. We're not allowing the promotion to happen at all. It's going to be organic. And
Yeah.
next thing you know, they've cut backroom deals with all the major labels, at least,
Yeah.
you know,
I don't
the
think it's
first
organic
one.
at all.
But
It doesn't seem organic very much to me.
oh, I can't see that it is anymore. And it may have been at one point, it may have been, but it's
Yeah.
everything points to, conglomerate with all the labels in cahoots.
Yeah.
Uh, and yes, independent artists can now record songs and put them up themselves, which, that was a big day for, I think, the industry and for clients like ours. Most of our artists are unsigned. I mean, we still do the occasional Prince record for Warner Brothers. We've got another I think I can say it as of today. We're going to be working the new remastered release of Talking Heads 77, which is a 3 disc slash 4 piece vinyl release coming
I
up
did
every,
pre-order that one. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but for the most part, these days, our clients are unsigned, and so it's been a great thing to be able to get them on Spotify, first of all. But now, with so many major labels in cahoots, how do they, how do you guys get exposure? And it's just that. We're reaching out to playlist curators and saying, hey, this fits your format, this fits the genres that you seem into, let's give it some spins and see what works.
Mhm.
And because of those small spins adding up, sometimes that algorithm catches and pushes it out to bigger playlists and to the editors. And like anybody, you have to go as the artist, you have to go to their promote your, next release page and pitch it to the editors. And I do believe that there are, 100+ editors getting an email every Monday morning saying, here are the releases for the week, divide and conquer. And if they're any worth putting up, then let's do it. But there's
Well,
thousands,
there's
right?
150,000 songs a day. New
Yeah,
songs being uploaded to Spotify. I mean, there's no way they can keep up with all that. So
right. They
whenever I
can't.
do those pitch things, I just assume it's going off into the ether. It never gets.
Yeah. Well, and for the most part, I think it is. And it's really frustrating for me to see it happen over and over with so many different artists like you, many unsigned, uh, putting up new music and just crossing fingers and hoping some editor is seeing it in his morning meeting and giving it a chance. And, uh, we rarely see it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we just 7, 8 weeks ago, we had one added to an editor's playlist, and of course, the streams took off.
Mhm.
But we can't back up and see the magic that happened or the switch that was flipped. We can see when he pitched it, when it went out, and that these singles this artist had been pushing for many, many months throughout the course of the year. None of them were being picked up, and then for whatever reason,
Yeah.
the fourth single was, and it was not the best single. The first three were,
Mhm.
right? So why did that one get picked up? It might have been just the numbers were slowly adding up to a place where the algorithm pushed it up a list, and there it was, and Monday morning meeting, and someone heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, I think that's why these services are so sort of seductive. Uh, they get you the stream numbers because my thought is, all right, well, if I have some numbers behind me, then an editor is more likely to look at the thing
Right.
and
And
listen.
they are.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like you say it's, now with Spotify, it's so great. Anybody on the planet can make music and put it out immediately for the whole world to hear. And then you go, anybody.
Anybody. Right.
And you go,
There's
well,
a lot of music out there.
and this guy, the Spotify guy, saying not too long ago, now that it costs close to zero to make musical content, it's like
Right.
it does. There's some expensive guitars behind me there.
No idea how insulting a
Oh
comment like that is either. Like, this guy obviously has never made music,
no,
even in his bedroom with
yeah,
recording equipment and guitars and microphones. I mean, like, you
yeah,
can't go buy a $9 microphone at Radio Shack and expect that to be worth
no,
putting up.
no. I mean, that's the thing is with digital technology, if you're an electronic musician, say you can make something on your laptop for next to nothing and
A
send it out.
$2,000 laptop.
Yeah, $2,000 laptop. Good point. You still got to buy software for it,
Yep.
Um, but the other thing he said in that quote was like he was curious what music would last the test of time with all this stuff coming out. And it's like, well, it ain't going to be the stuff made for next to nothing. You know,
Right.
it's not going to be. They didn't make Sergeant Pepper's for next to nothing.
Right.
Spent a buck or two on that.
And yet 20 years ago, I would have probably agreed with that because I was in the midst of watching the Elephant Six Collective and all the bands from that collective record on shoestring budgets on 4 tracks in the same house right down the street from me. And we're talking about Neutral Milk Hotel and Olivia Tremor Control and Apples in Stereo and many more of Montreal. I mean,
Yeah,
the list goes on, and many of those are still recording today, but they were bedroom recordings on 4 tracks, and
yeah.
that was rare. I
Just
remember,
I just
yeah,
it's just one of these.
Tascam.
Yep, I'm gonna do some songs on it. But even then, you take away the cost of the recording, you're talking about a massive cost of time and effort and
Yeah,
opportunity cost, I
yeah.
guess. Call
I
it.
mean, how many pizzas do you have to deliver to have a whole Saturday with all your buds to record on a Tascam, which isn't a free piece of equipment,
Yeah.
and all the guitars and drums that make it? So there's still no free music.
This is probably $1,200 when it was new.
Ah,
Uh, I got
when
on.
when did you find that?
Actually, I got on Reverb.com. You can find them on there. And I've been reading about Springsteen's Nebraska album and how he recorded the whole thing on 4 track. And they said it's the only time somebody recorded an album without realizing they were recording an album because he was just making demos. And then they were like, well, the demos are better than what we're doing now. So let's just put the demos out.
Yeah,
Uh,
so
you know,
unique.
so, and there's always examples. I mean, like the first Police album was recorded for like 3 grand or something like that, but to say the cost is close to zero, even if the financial cost is close to zero,
Yeah,
it's not at all to make anything good anyway. The reason the Police record was good was because of all the stuff they did before that to get good.
right.
So
Yeah, well, and they were all over the place. Where was that first one recorded? It wasn't in London or the United States, right?
I don't
Didn't they
know.
get, I think they went to South America to do that first one and to try and build a fan base because they felt like new bands could not be discovered in London or New York.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and the brothers put together IRS, police, etc., right? Like they spent a lot of time and energy focusing on how are we going to build this group and release them and break them.
yeah, yeah. Now, I've been ripping on the algorithm. I'll give you an example of where it works, though. And this just happened to me over the weekend.
Okay.
I got an email from a guy who said, "Hey, I'm late to the party. I'm just discovering Blueburst, but I love this record." And of course, my ego goes to the roof, and I'm like, awesome, cool. And I said, "How'd you find out about it?" And he said, "Well, I was listening to Grace Under Pressure by Rush, and at the end of the album, it played your song." And I'm like, that's how it's supposed to work, right?
Exactly.
It's terrific. I mean, that for one thing, that album was a huge influence on my guitar playing because it came out when I was learning to play guitar.
Yeah.
And it's like I can't complain about that. That's
Right.
that's exactly what I need is like somebody
Right.
listening to something similar and algorithm goes, hey, you know what? You might like this. And they do. Um, and especially for an artist like myself who's I'm in my 50s, I'm not playing music that appeals to kids that go out to clubs and all that, but I do think there's an audience for what I'm doing of other people closer to my age who are out there who do listen to Spotify,
For sure.
aren't reading the magazines and keeping up with all of it the way that we did when we were kids when you go out and buy Circus and Spin and
Right.
magazines like that.
Well, and they might be listening to Rush on Spotify and
Yeah.
then hear something that they've never heard before that fits, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, that is how it's supposed to work. If you want to say Spotify is an organic outlet for music discovery, well, then after Rush plays, other artists like them that are fairly unknown
Yeah.
should be spinning.
And I've
Um,
found it, you can see on there on the Blueburst page, it says other similar artists. And I've clicked through them and I'm like, yeah, this is mostly stuff I really like, because it's right up my alley. So, um,
and
there is that. There is that. I
There,
can't,
yeah, that's where the editors started it, and then the algorithm took it over, and it is working.
yeah.
In fact, that some of our reps who have done Spotify streaming campaigns for us have services that they offer, and we're not so sure we're going to go down that path yet, but where they can basically, I think, pay to be that first song after a playlist, and it's costly, but they've got a system worked out, maybe with certain editors, where they can get an editorial type play.
Yeah.
And it's not based on an editorial playlist, it's just what's the first thing that people hear after a popular playlist.
Hmm.
And so that we've seen the numbers really ramp up after one of those. And we're just not sure that it's legit enough to put our name on it yet. So we're going to continue researching it
Yeah.
because that would be ideal. And I think a lot of artists would pay a couple $100 to just be in that placement, right? Like when
Yeah.
someone finishes listening to a Husker Du album, you know, should Blueburst be right there after it? Like that would make sense.
It's funny you mention that because I never really listened to that much Bob Mould or Husker Du. I don't know why. I just didn't. And I've had so many people go, "Oh, your stuff, it reminds me so much of Bob Mould," and I'm like,
That's the first thing I heard when I listened
so
to
now I
your
listen.
album.
I'm like,
Yeah.
great,
And I
great.
thought, man, I dig this. This really reminds me of like these are some songs that David Barbie and Bob Mould could have done together as Sugar,
Yeah, yeah.
and Sugar blew
I have
me
a copy of
away.
that Sugar album. I did have that
Yeah.
Blue, but yeah, no, it's cool. It's kind of cool that that happened. I had a couple people tell me I sounded like Ozzy, my voice, and I was like, yeah, cool.
Not
I
what you were going for, but
that happened, but
it
rock.
sounds great.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it's all this must have been all those bats that I was eating as a young man. Um, what else? What else is on my list of stuff to talk about? I think we covered most
We
of it.
talked about DJs and radio and algorithms. We even talked about Rush.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
They seem to always come up when I'm around. But it's such a funny thing. It's like do you want to admit you're a Rush fan? For a while, I was like, no, not no one would admit it. And then they were kind of cool again. And
yeah,
Dave Grohl got up. I remember to induct him into the Hall of Fame, and he's like, something incredible has happened. Rush is cool. I was like,
right.
I don't know if I get that far, but
We were all such music geeks when we were learning our instruments back in the day that we thought it was cool, but I was a band geek. I wasn't telling anyone outside of band that I was cool, and I didn't think they thought I was. I was marching, playing music,
yeah.
not on the football team.
Well, it's just the complexity of it makes it fun to play.
Yeah,
It's much
the
more fun to
ultimate
put on
band's band, right?
pictures and play along with it than it is like Fables of the Reconstruction. And I like both of those albums, a ton.
Right.
But as a guitar geek, anyway, REM also comes up every time I'm around. So you're
Yeah.
living in Athens, you probably talk to death about them. But
Well, to a degree, but you know what? you touched on, how sort of college radio came to be back in the day and what was alternative. And those guys sort of defined an era and a genre, as to what was alternative. They were the alternative to pop rock radio, commercial radio at the time, and they were all over college radio.
Yeah.
And, CMJ was a young company just starting in what, 85 to 87, something like that. The College Media Journal, or the College Music Journal as it was for a time.
Mhm.
Um, and REM would top those charts. And
Yeah.
that's where really alternative started. And then we started to call it things like, well, let's not just call it alternative, because now Siamese Dream is all over radio in 93, and
Yeah.
that's alternative. It wasn't
It's-
alternative when it was Gish.
yeah.
Uh,
But like if you look back at the top 40 of like 92, it's like Chili Peppers, U2, Smashing Pumpkins, REM, it's all like so-called alternative music.
all that was alternative. And
Yeah.
then to me in 93, some things started shifting. Like 93 was a big year to me for what I just called indie rock.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's because certain indie rock got big, like, right, Smashing Pumpkins, Siamese Dream was 93. Punkin' Drublic by NoFX all of a sudden was getting, MTV airplay. And um, Superchunk, all of a sudden sort of crossed over. And all these I called indie. Sebado, had that breakthrough record all in 93. And
Yeah.
we started calling them, not college rock, but indie rock,
Yeah.
because that was definitely coming from a more indie mindset and also from indie labels.
Well, yeah.
And
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, no, and that's when we sort of delineated between, is this alternative or is this indie rock? And from
Yeah.
that point, indie rock really stuck.
I think, we talked about the other day. Uh, I have thought of us as alternative because I'm thinking of The Cure
Yeah.
and, the church,
Alternative to the
the
mainstream.
bands that were alternative back then. Uh, and I always thought indie was like Pavement and Superchunk and bands that, had zero effects on what they were doing, real lo-fi kind of thing. But I think the indie genre has expanded into stuff like what we do, and the alternative genres kind of moved more corporate and
Right.
polished. I feel like that when I put on an alternative playlist on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, it's really slick stuff
Yeah.
that I really want to listen to.
It's
Put
slick
indie on
art,
and you know,
alt rock, and it's slick hard rock.
yeah,
And it's a lot of times overproduced. And yeah, I don't think you guys sound like that. I could see it, some of your songs fitting in those playlists, but it's not your sound.
no,
And I mean, that's kind of where I was going with that, is that that was alternative from 93 to 97. We started calling indie rock, and it
yeah,
stuck. And college rock, I mean, I think, with early REM they just called it college rock.
yeah,
uh, but that's where alternative said, no, we're going to take Siamese Dream and we're going to go that route. And Pearl Jam and etc.
yeah.
Was
Well,
the alternative to top 40.
yeah, and that's where the name indie came from, right? It's like you're an independent artist. You don't have a big label,
Yeah.
so you probably don't have that much money to go into a huge
Yeah.
recording studio. So you're a little lo-fi and a little grungy. Yeah, it's crazy how it's
Yeah.
all shifted.
But go back and listen to Pavement and Superchunk and Sebado and all those from
Yeah,
right in that 93, 97 range. And they're not poorly recorded, like the production quality is really good. It's just, I think their aesthetic was, don't overproduce it, right? Do it raw, natural, the way we wrote it, the way we want to hear it. And a lot of those were recorded in great studios with nice new equipment.
yeah,
And probably paid a pretty penny for the studio time, just maybe not, top 40 engineers and producers, but
Yeah.
they all sound amazing still to this day. And I think because they aren't overproduced. Whereas to me, Smashing Pumpkins lost me. Like I liked Siamese Dream, but that clear, overwashed, overproduced sound was
Yeah.
not what I was used to. And it for whatever reason, sonically, it gets on my nerves.
Well, it's funny how Nirvana is like the one band that went in reverse, right? It's like Nevermind was pretty slick, and
Yeah.
then Kurt was like, no, 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 and In Utero's just like punching
Yeah.
in the mouth.
Well, and their first record was raw as
Yeah,
hell. It
yeah.
wasn't anything like Nevermind. And that's the one that I still find myself coming back to. And I love Nevermind. I mean, I really think that's one of my top, 50 or 100 records of all time. But
These songs were so good, you could have recorded
yeah,
them anyway, and it'd been still been great.
but I'll bet you when their A&R guy heard them at Geffen, they were raw and they were,
Yeah,
unproduced, and
yeah,
then it's enough studio magic and trimming back more than adding to.
yeah, yeah. Um, that's something I was going to say, but I guess it wasn't that important because I can't remember now. So,
Well,
uh,
I always want to ask you questions too. Like, how did what were turning points in you recording your last record, and how did you feel about the recording of it?
yeah. Well, it's funny. I was talking to Ryan Kelly, the bassist, about this the other day, and he said, I didn't realize what an ambitious project this was when you first asked me to play on it. And I said, well, I didn't either. I just thought it was going to be one song, and the way it kind of happened is, the pandemic happened. So I just had my guitar in my hand a lot more often than I did before, because I was home and I hadn't made any music in a long, long time. But I had a hard drive full of sort of half finished stuff. And I had started working with Marty Wilson Piper, who I met, years ago and kept up with sporadically. And he started doing these sessions over Skype for people called Songwriting and Guitar Guidance.
Right.
And so I started working with him through that and just kind of gradually unfroze that side of my brain and started finishing songs, with him pressuring me. I mean, there's nothing like having somebody sort of telling you to do it to make you finish.
Yeah.
And to me,
Accountability exercises from Marty Wilson Piper.
accountability, yeah. I mean, and the great thing about Marty is any criticism he gives you or any pushing he gives you all comes from the best possible place, which is just that he loves music so much that he wants it to be as good as it can be,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it would be a tragedy if a piece of music wasn't as good as it could be. And I think the whole thing's been a real example of the value of mentorship. He's kind of been my mentor in this. He's like musical Yoda, I've referred to him as. And it's really hard to find that in life in general, especially at my age, to find someone like that to kind of come in and coach you and go, all right, I've been there, I've done this before. Let me tell you what to do and what not to do. Uh, and so I don't think the record would have happened at all without him. It certainly wouldn't have been anywhere near as good. But I
Well,
feel like, in one sense, yeah, I wrote all the songs and I played most of the guitar on it, on the record. But on the other hand, I feel a bit like the Steve Jobs thing where he said, I play the orchestra. It's like I got a great drummer. I got Michael Jerome. I got
yeah.
Ryan, who's the best bass player I've ever seen, I think, and Marty. And then we got Riley Schatz to sing on the John Denver thing that we did. So that's been fun. And that was all at the behest of Marty. At the beginning, I was like, well, I'm going to play drums on this because I played drums, when I was a kid, and I'm a serviceable drummer. He's like, well, why wouldn't you try to find somebody better than that? Better than
Right.
serviceable. And I'm like, you're right.
Serviceable.
I wonder what that guy Michael Jerome that I used to know in Dallas is doing. And
Yeah.
so uh,
Well, and aren't you glad, right? Like
yeah,
you had
yeah,
that push from Marty, but give yourself a little credit too. Like you took that moment to be vulnerable and to reach out to a hero and say, "Hey, help me fine tune my guitar playing."
Yeah.
And this is where it led, right? And maybe you didn't
Yeah.
feel worthy of these tracks that you weren't finishing, and now all of a sudden you feel like, yeah, these
Yeah.
tracks are good and have direction.
Yeah. And I mean, it's extremely gratifying, because I can tell that Marty really likes the record, and when we were going through it to decide on the order of the songs, he was just like, "This can't just be one of these records where your friends hear it, no one else hears it. This has to go out somewhere. This is too good." And so that was like, you know, if nothing else ever happens to me again, my one of my musical heroes said that about music I was making. So,
Right.
fantastic.
Well, and you got him to play on it with you. I
Yeah,
mean, how
yeah,
cool, right?
yeah, totally.
Well,
Yeah,
look,
he
you
added,
have if I may say so, you have a natural guiding mentorship about you, and it shows when you bring on young singers like Riley, and you take mentorship from an older artist like Marty. And there's something to be said for that because you are sharing what your passions are. You're sharing what's important to you with
yeah,
others who find it important too. And I find myself at this age doing the same thing more and more, and getting more satisfaction out of that. In fact, I do consulting in music industry for young artists, and turns out they're not all young. A couple of them have been in their 50s,
yeah,
and they're saying the same thing. I have all these songs that I just cataloged and I just stashed them away, and now I'd kind of like to get them out. And so
yeah,
I talk to those folks, and at the same time, I'm consulting 23-year-olds who are ready to make a career out of it. And
yeah,
that is fun to me.
yeah,
That's sort of takes that, gives me the joy that I once had just calling college radio stations because I was
yeah,
similar age to them and could get excited about the same bands. And I still call these stations, but consulting and talking to young artists and sharing knowledge to me is really the fun part. That's the part that gets me excited. And I joke about accountability exercises, but that's one thing that I do when I consult, like
yeah,
I want to be like, I don't want to be called a life coach, but I want to do what life coaches do for musicians and not just tell them what they should do, right?
yeah,
Like hear who they are and help guide them. So
yeah.
that's fun to me. And I think you've
Sure.
got that
Yeah, I
naturally
mean,
too.
anytime we can, I think we all have that desire to keep people from making the same mistakes we think we made,
Right.
help them through it and go, God, if I'd had someone to tell me that back in the day, who knows what
Right.
so it is fun. I find myself trying to give advice to young people in bars, and they don't really want to hear it.
Well, that might not be the
Yeah,
place that
yeah,
they're hoping to get it.
no, no, probably. I thankfully I don't go out to bars that much anymore, but yeah, it's I mean, I have a line in that song "Senseless" where I say I want a do over, and in a way, helping someone younger than you do it
Form of doing it over.
and you did it is kind of getting a do over in a way. So it's
Yeah.
not, but well, cool, man. Well, we've been talking for over an hour, so this is
Yeah.
going to bore everyone to death with another hour of it. But this has been great. I'm excited to post this, and
Thanks. Yeah, we'll do it again too. I've enjoyed it very much, and
yeah,
we'll always have plenty to talk about.
yeah, definitely, man. I really appreciate your time to do it, and I'll let
Sure.
you when we get online. So
Thanks so much, Craig.
cool, man. All right, thanks.
Have a great one.
Catch you later. Bye.
Yeah.